Okay, very good. So at this point, we will get started. We have let the participants to the session into the room. So we would like to officially welcome everyone to the first virtual forum hosted by the Assembly of First Nations for, of course, First Nation leadership from across the country with the various party leaders leading up to the 45th general election on April 28th, 2025. So it's very important to start today's session in a good way. So we will have an opening prayer from Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler. Leonard Weasel Traveler, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. It's always an honor to be able to provide support for meetings, events such as this. It's my honor to call on the Creator, the Source and Giver of life, to be with us in this session, for asking for divine intervention from God to help all of us. We all have our individual needs. Ask the creators to provide all our needs. Ask the Creator to give us the positive energy for the best possible outcome for this meeting, for this session, especially for all my brothers and sisters across this country. We need good leadership. We need. There's so many things that we need, and we look to the leadership. We look to government to provide the needs for us. So my prayer is for that support, and for everybody that's participating in this virtual session, this virtual meeting. I will say a few words in my first language. I was bad to build. I not to size na spumosin hamokri moipsticks. Kokana suka pin hanika homotomoipstian hanikusuki kishtanoak. Ogenixtago what chip you kinanix, genixtago to mark kinanix. Yakokana suka pinakita passes kapu kinat gana suka pitachista tubina. Imma tu kinanis to bad to piopi. Na piusine ni stoatsimani gamutania satapis. My prayer was again what I mentioned, for support and divine intervention for the best possible outcome for everybody that's participating in this meeting today. Amen.
Miigwech, thank you so much to Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler for opening this session this afternoon. Egonin nada juigabon jinkas na meben dodem, egoneng wazaganing donji dan. My English name, of course, is Adam Fiddler, and I will be hosting and moderating this session with the group on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations here this afternoon. And as I mentioned, of course, this is the first session for the Assembly of First Nations virtual forums with the various party leaders. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. Just to let you know, there is simultaneous translation available for both English and French. You can select a language by clicking the translation icon at the bottom of the screen. Of course, the little globe icon at the bottom, and you can either select French or English. Both translations are available. There is also closed captioning available for the session. I believe that all participants that are online did get a link, and you can click on the link. We will try and make it available here as well. You can click on the link and you will be able to see the closed captioning. Also, just a reminder that this virtual session will be recorded and it will be posted online after each of the forums has been held. They will be publicly posted. So just a quick review of the agenda for today. Of course, we will begin with opening remarks from National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinak, who will be welcoming the Green Party co-leaders, Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pednault, to our forum here today. The party leaders will be given 5 minutes to provide opening comments before we go into the moderated question and answer period. So the AFN has developed 5 questions that we shared in advance of this session, which will cover the following topics. Number 1, Canada-US border and trade. Number 2, First Nations infrastructure gap. Number 3, water. Number 4, policing. And number 5, children and families. So once we make it through those 5 questions, we will open up the session for any questions from registered First Nation leadership. If you would like to pose a question to the Green Party co-leaders, please write your question and submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So we'll go through as many questions as we can within a 40-minute period. So just a reminder, go to the bottom of the screen. There's a Q&A box. If you don't see that, you should be able to go to Other and then just click on the Q&A session. At that point, you can type in your question. After we've finished the question period, we will invite the Green Party co-leaders back for closing remarks, and we will invite the National Chief back as well, Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak, for closing remarks, and then we will end the session. Again, very important to end in a good way with a closing prayer from Leonard Weasel Traveler. So at this point, we are very pleased to have National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak with us here today. National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak was born and raised in Pednault First Nation, Manitoba. Her ancestor, Chief Richard Woodhouse, was an original signatory to Treaty Number 2. She began her term as National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations on December 7th, 2023, becoming the youngest woman and mother to hold the position. So we'd like to welcome National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak to the session today to provide opening remarks and, of course, introduce the Green Party co-leaders. With that, National Chief. National Chief, you're on mute, just to let you know. No, we still can't hear you. So
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
We're good? Perfect. Well, my name is Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak, and I come from Pednault First Nation. Chimigwech to Elder Leonard Weasel Traveler for welcoming us this morning and starting this afternoon, starting this off in a good way. It's the first time the Assembly of First Nations has hosted, all the different leaders and to talk about what's happening in our country. Adam, I want to thank you as well for agreeing to host these sessions as we, talk about the kind of country that we want. So I want to, again, thank the Elder for the prayer, all the chiefs that are here, the council, the First Nations leaders, First Nations members, and members of the media for attending today. We are so I'm thankful to be coming to you live from Treaty 1 territory. And today's session is the first of a series of online forums that the Assembly of First Nations is hosting with each of the federal party leaders prior to the April 28th election. These sessions are being recorded, and we will post all of them online before the election so that all First Nations and all Canadians can hear what each of the leaders have to say. This is the first time, of course, that the AFN has hosted a series like this with the party leaders. So I want to uplift and thank our staff for pulling things together and for making sure that things run smooth today, and to make sure that our leadership and our First Nations across our beautiful country have access to, federal leaders that want to be Prime Minister in this country. If we ever needed an election forum series exclusively for First Nations, I think 2025 is the year that we have to do it. Not only are we moving into a dangerous era of US colonialism, we are also coming up to the 10th anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliations Commission historic calls to action. And as we have said at the outset of this campaign, Canada's economic success and future stability depend on First Nations being full and equal partners in decision-making. Our rights are affirmed in treaty, recognized in Canadian and international law that must be upheld. Over $560 billion of projects are forecast to be launched on our traditional lands over the next decade. They have been a focus point on this election, and rightfully so. So the potential benefit of these projects is in the trillions of dollars. They represent a cornerstone of Canada's future economic growth, but they won't advance without First Nations support. For this campaign, the Assembly of First Nations released a document that captures First Nations priorities for each of the leaders to consider. We've sent it to them, and it's called Prosperity for All, and we have sent it out to all First Nations. In addition to the calls to action and resolutions from Chiefs in Assembly, Prosperity for All document reflects the calls for justice on behalf of our missing and murdered First Nations women and girls and Canada's United Nations Declaration Act. It also outlines the key commitments we are seeking from party leaders, particularly related to economic reconciliation, to Canada-US trade and border mobility, policing, on First Nations policing, on clean drinking water for First Nations, and on the well-being of First Nations children, families, and the environment. So we'll touch on each of these in this forum today. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you and welcome the co-leaders of the Green Party. My friend Elizabeth May has been the MP for Saanich Gulf Island since 2011, and she is running there in this election. Elizabeth was first elected Green Party leader in 2006, and she served in that role for 13 years. She was elected to co-lead the Green Party in 2022. So thank you today, Elizabeth, and your commitment to First Nations issues throughout your career. We lift you up in a good way for always standing up for the environment and being an ally to First Nations in the House of Commons. As well with the Green Party co-leader, Jonathan Pednault. Jonathan was elected Green Party co-leader with Elizabeth in 2022. In this election, Jonathan is running in the Quebec riding of Outermont. So I want to thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. Finally, I want to thank our moderator, Adam Fiddler, for taking the time to manage these sessions. You always do such a great job at our assemblies, and I'm so glad that you came to help us today. And we wish you all a very good meeting, a good discussion on the 2025 federal election. So I look forward to listening and learning from all of you on, how we move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Sneepenack. So at this point, we'll take 5 minutes and we'll turn it over to the co-leaders, Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pednault.
I'm deeply honored to be joining. I think, Jonathan, you and I are sharing 5 minutes. We want to respect that. We share everything, so that's not unusual. I just wanted to start, if I may, Jonathan, with a huge miigwech and what an honor to be in a first panel, to be welcomed by Assembly of First Nations National Chief, and for you to identify me as friend Cindy Woodhouse-Sneepenack. I'm deeply honored. I wear the ribbon skirt you gave me with such gratitude to many events, and it was so kind at that water honoring ceremony when I first met you in Winnipeg when you were regional chief. And I wish you so much blessings and that the Creator shine on you and the work you are doing. And I'm meeting your parents that time too. If that wasn't that time, another time I met your parents. Anyway, never mind. I shouldn't do this. I always do this. I start going down rabbit holes. I want to thank Adam Fiddler for moderating, and especially to Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler for starting us out in such a good way. I want to acknowledge that I speak to you today from Saanich territory on southern Vancouver Island, and in the language of the peoples who have occupied this land from time immemorial. Raise my hands to all of you. Haishka Siam. I see it's so amazing to realize that on this call, we also have another chief, just extraordinary leader in Cookby, Roseanne Casimir. So I say to her, Cook's Jam, amazing work that is being done throughout SNS and all the First Nations across Canada. I'd say one or two things and then turn it to Jonathan very quickly because there's a lot to cover. Actually, tomorrow I'm announcing publicly the platform of the plank of the platform on Indigenous issues for the Green Party. I've been keeping track in this election of what I call MIA, missing in action, issues we don't hear about, Indigenous reconciliation, climate, both critical issues and not being talked about much. So I'd be honored to present some of our platform today. and answer any questions. And I thank you for, again, Miigwech, for sending the questions ahead of time. I'm deeply honored to share that Green Party doesn't have leaders who operate top down. We're not in charge of anyone but our own conduct. Jonathan and I are co-leaders, understood to be co-spokespeople. We're not, we don't have a top-down control system. We don't whip votes. Our members of parliament represent the people of their community, and we are not hierarchical. We try to break out of the expectations of colonialism, repression, and exploitation. Years ago, our membership passed resolutions to denounce the doctrine of discovery, to make it clear that Indigenous reconciliation requires a nation-to-nation relationship with respect towards Indigenous sovereignty. And we also, of course, frame our platform around the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We confirm the support for the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the work of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We will implement those calls to justice and calls to action. So, à toi, tu as la parole, Jonathan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm also deeply honored to be here. Thank you, National Chief Adam Fiddler. I'm speaking to all of you today from Trochake on the traditional unceded territory of the Ganginkiaga Nation. It's an honor for me every time I have a chance to sit in forums like these to learn more and hear about the concerns of Indigenous and First Nations throughout the country. We have an awful lot of work to do in Canada to live up to the difficult work of reconciliation, but a work that is absolutely needed. And it pains me as a Quebecer to see that this work is very much lagging behind here in Quebec, probably more than in some other provinces. But I think that collectively we can continue to move this agenda forward. Elizabeth touched on the MIAs in this election, and certainly reconciliation has not been brought forth as a priority by media, who is very much busy with what is happening south of the border. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity that we have here today to discuss issues that are close to my heart and Elizabeth's and the Green Party at large, so that we can collectively build a country, not just for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, but the generations to come. So thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, both Jonathan Pednault and Elizabeth May, of course, co-leaders of the Green Party of Canada. So what we've done is we've identified 5 questions. They've been sent to the leaders ahead of time. And then, of course, after that, we will be opening up for any further questions here online. Now, the plan is 3 minutes for each response. So I'm not sure which co-leader will respond. So I'll leave that to you. At your discretion, whether you want to tag team and split your time or whether it's one person, I'll leave that to you. So, of course, the first question: how will you include First Nations in First Ministers meetings and other federal, provincial, territorial meetings dealing with Canada-US border security and trade? Of course, a big issue right now.
May I, Jonathan, and I'll go quickly as I can. I'm putting my timer on. Greens have a concept for a new system of governance for Canada writ large, which will not require reopening the Constitution. But on every issue, Indigenous peoples should be at the table. And we drew this model from Australia, which left out Indigenous people, ironically. But the Australian model is called the Council of Australian Governments. So there's a seat at the table for the federal government of Australia, their state governments, which are kind of like our provinces, and local governments, municipalities. We make our table in 4 quadrants. So it actually kind of looks like a medicine wheel when you draw it. So federal, provincial, territorial, local, Indigenous. So that on every issue, our vision of how Canada functions is not a First Ministers meeting. but everyone at the table to try to, try to row our canoe in the same direction all the time, that we would pick by consensus a goal that's national and work towards it together. So we would have no discussions about trade with the United States or any other issues without Indigenous leadership at the table. And Jonathan, I think I've left you about a minute left, maybe.
No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think we have, I'm from a generation that didn't go through the traumas of constitutional discussions in this country, but I do think that we are ripe very soon for new discussions about the state of the nation. Indigenous communities were not at the table in 1867, and I do think that we have a lot of lessons from the ongoing work on reconciliation that we can draw from, concrete examples of places where things can and should be better in terms of including everyone's voices and respecting the primacy of Indigenous knowledge and ownership of the land that we are grateful to live on, and that is something that I think very soon we need collectively as Canada to bring back to the table. How do we make sure that everyone's voice is at the table, especially on the question of the US relationship right now?
Thank you both so much for the response and sticking with the timeframes that we have. So the next question is dealing with the infrastructure gap. What steps will you be taking, first of all, in the first year and then throughout your term to close the First Nations infrastructure gap across the country? And I'll leave it to you to how you respond.
Elizabeth, you're the elder statesman. I'll let
Well,
you lead
let me
here.
go. Then I was just wondering, I thought we should take turns, but I'll go first. Infrastructure gap is enormous. And again, we start with the existing recommendations. So one infrastructure gap was identified in the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. How is it that in a modern industrialized country like Canada, people are left to hitchhike? If you have wealth, and you have a car, you can get around. But other than in our urban areas where there's public transportation, there's virtually no public transportation. So to get to Prince George, and you're either you have a big car or you're on an airplane. We need to listen to those recommendations. One was we also endorse guaranteed livable income. The other is from the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls directly to infrastructure, is to ensure safe, reliable, and low cost public transportation across Canada. We also fully support that recommendation of that inquiry to shut down man camps, reducing risks and reducing environmental damage. The other key piece of infrastructure, of course, and I think that may come up in another question, is for Indigenous control over infrastructure to deliver clean drinking water. We certainly support that, and it's been way overdue.
I'll add that we're also very concerned about food security throughout Canada and for all Canadians, but especially in a number of First Nations throughout the country. Up north, I was just in the Yukon, where carrying food from the bigger cities into communities is extremely expensive. We have the solutions technologically and otherwise to make sure that food production can be more localized and closer to the communities, but that needs to be made possible through the various regulations. So work with the territorial and provincial governments on that front, but also seed investments that are needed for these projects to actually see the light of day and reduce the cost of food throughout Canada, and especially in communities that are more isolated from the production center. So that is also something that is very important. And then housing. Housing remains a crisis throughout the country, but especially in First Nations and communities throughout the country up north. That is something that the Liberals are now, slowly trying to improve, but the investments need to be wider, bigger, and the houses need to be delivered faster. And that's why we want to get the federal government back into the actual business of building the homes itself, not just pushing this into the hands of private developers.
Great. And just to let you both know, I mean, we're a little bit flexible. I did say 3 minutes, but there are two of you as co-leaders, so there is some flexibility to give you a little bit of extra time if you need it to be able to respond properly. But we will go to the next question, and another very important issue, of course, is water. And I'll let you decide who responds first. And again, a little bit of extra time is okay. Question is, what is your plan to introduce a bill, something similar to Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act, and to end the outstanding boil water advisories on reserves across the country?
If I can start just by saying C-61 was introduced in my view. I mean, I know there was support for it. We would have supported it, but it certainly was flawed in the failure to fully engage in consultations in advance with Indigenous peoples across Canada, with First Nations, and understanding how C-61 should best be framed. We certainly support in all, and stress all and underline that, aspects of Indigenous governance, self-governance, respect for sovereignty, and so yes, making sure that safe drinking water, potable water is delivered to all First Nations homes. But water is more than that. Water is controlling the watershed, is making sure that control over logging protects the watershed, making sure that wetlands are protected because there's green infrastructure that protects clean drinking water. It's not all concrete and pipes. And that also means listening to Indigenous wisdom, listening to communities and elders and what was water like before contact, what was the system that was existing before exploitation and colonialization. It also is something that I want to mention is that I did get a bill through Parliament, and the Senator, Cree Senator Mary Jane McCallum, helped me enormously. So I took it through the House, she took it through the Senate, for a bill towards environmental justice and an end to environmental racism. So in communities across Canada, we find more toxic waste on Indigenous lands. The disrespect of Indigenous peoples and culture through many cases across Canada of environmental racism. I think that also does apply to water, safe drinking water, and Indigenous sovereignty over maintaining those systems to ensure clean water.
And I'll just add very briefly, of course, we're also fighting for stronger regulations for extractives who are affecting the quality of water in so many water streams. Just as Elizabeth was mentioning, for all too long now, the mining sector, the oil and gas sector are they're allowed, in some cases facilitated, the opportunity to operate near waterways that are essential to the provision of drinking water for several Indigenous communities and other communities throughout the country. And we want stronger regulations. That should not come as a surprise, but they need to play by the rules, and when they don't, they need to pay and they need to compensate. Last thing is that, of course, we would also be supportive of giving legal rights to bodies of water, whether it's the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, to allow for groups of citizens, Indigenous communities to sue when they pollute these bodies of water, as we know they have, and sadly will continue to do unless we have stronger regulations to prevent it.
Thank you both for the response. So I'd just like to remind everyone, those of you joining the sessions as well that have registered and formally joined the session, we did identify 5 questions that were pre-identified and sent to the party leaders. So we'll be going through those 5 questions. We've got 2 more, at which point we will open it up to any questions on the floor from any registered participants. So if you do have a question, what we will do is we'll be going through those, and just a reminder, go to the bottom of the screen. There should be an icon, Q&A with a question mark. Just click that and you can ask your question. And we will be looking at the questions. We'll be going to that as soon as we're done the 2 predetermined questions. So again, the next question deals with policing. And the question is, what steps will you be taking to call for a public inquiry into in-custody deaths and introduce a bill establishing First Nations policing as an essential service that includes long-term funding and recognition of First Nations jurisdiction? So again, I'll let you decide who responds first.
I'm so angry. I'll never get over losing Chantel Moore on June 4th. And now it's 3 years coming up. Wellness checks and the policing that kills people and calls it a wellness check. It's long overdue that we deal with the systemic racism within policing across Canada. By the way, when we talk about the numbers of Indigenous peoples in jail, Jonathan and my deputy leader, Rainbow Eyes, is a member of her traditional territories at Night Inlet in BC. She's currently appealing a sentencing of 51 days in jail for nonviolent land defense of Indigenous, as an Indigenous land defender against logging in old growth forests. But we're looking at the desperate need to reform the RCMP. The report, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but the Mass Casualty Commission that looked at the killing of 21 people in Nova Scotia by a lone deranged white rich man. I mention that because if he wasn't a white rich man, it came up very clearly in the 5,000 pages of the Mass Casualty Commission report that for over 10 years, various people had reported that this man was dangerous, that he had been abusive to Indigenous women, that he'd beaten up on someone who happened to be sitting at a bus shelter right in front of where this man's denture clinic was in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. He killed 21 people in a shooting spree. But the RCMP had many reports about him. And you go through the police reports that's there in this mass casualty report, and they'd say, well, the police wouldn't investigate, for instance, when he beat up people. They say, well, why would this rich guy beat up and steal from a poor person? You just know that that policing in Canada had this, the alleged perpetrator been Indigenous or a person of color, they would have absolutely believed that they beat up on people. But they were a rich white guy. So there's a disproportionate, as we know, disproportionate level of Indigenous people and people of color in our prisons. And that's not an accident. It has to do with the deep racism within our policing. So it's a matter of urgency that government live up to the previous commitment it made to Indigenous policing in Indigenous communities. If the government, I pledge to you, if the government doesn't act and the new Minister of Justice bring forward such a bill immediately, I'll be drafting it and producing it as a private member's bill. We have to have action on this. No, not again. Should we need to investigate all the wellness checks where Indigenous people are killed, and we need to make sure that we thoroughly investigate and better train police officers. But Indigenous communities should be policed by people who are community members within Indigenous communities.
And very briefly, beyond that, there's also the question of reconciliation between the Crown, the federal Crown, and Indigenous communities. We have prosecutors coming from Southern communities, oftentimes being dispatched without appropriate training on how to deal with a number of offenses that take place in communities, and with no cultural appreciation of the context in which they operate, and that causes harm and trauma and re-traumatization, and that is something that needs to be addressed, just as there's a need for more Indigenous people in legal professions generally, and that needs to be supported by the federal government.
Thank you both, Jonathan Pednault and Elizabeth May, for the response on that question. And again, just a reminder, we did say 3 minutes, but we'll sort of give you 3 minutes each if required. These are very important matters and very important issues as we lead up to the election. So, of course, the fifth theme for the session is children and families. So the question is, and again, I'll let the two of you decide who goes first. The question is, what steps will you take to provide long-term funding for Jordan's Principle and a commitment to long-term reform of the discriminatory First Nations child welfare system? So I'll give it to you to see who goes first.
You go, JP.
No, it's essential that we have stable, permanent funding for Jordan's principle. For us, it's about honoring and implementing the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal rulings, but it's also about reforming the child welfare system with Indigenous nations. We need to fund First Nations-led child and family services. And all of this is also integral with the questions of housing, of water, building, ensuring that there's an equitable per capita funding for education and health, which is not currently the case. So ultimately, for us, it's about justice and treaty rights. It's about a binding human rights obligation, but it touches on more than the Jordan Principle itself. It's a holistic need to make sure that there is appropriate support for health, for education, housing, mental health support, special needs support, that no child is denied care because of where they come from or where they live or who governs their community. And that requires it requires resources, of course, but it also requires listening to the voices of the community, empowering them and listening to them, and doing so with humility and respect.
It shouldn't have taken so many court cases, and it shouldn't take so long to get action. And there are more children in care now. There are still children in care who've been taken from their families. This has got to stop. So I think Jonathan's answer, and this is an issue of deep concern. Intergenerational trauma is not in the past tense. It's an ongoing issue of our settler culture, colonial approaches that are still harming families.
Thank you both very much. And so at this point, we've gone through the 5 questions that were pre-sent to the party leaders. We'll be doing this for all 4 sessions with the various parties, giving them the questions in advance. So at this point, we'd like to open it up if there are any questions. And a reminder, participants, if you've registered, again, this is for First Nation leadership from across the country. If you have registered online and you're joining us here virtually, if you do have a question, we're not using the conventional chat box that we would often have on the side, but we do have a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Just click the button and then you can ask your question. If you don't see it, you should be able to see it, but there might be another button that says more with the 3 dots. Click that and you should be able to access the Q&A function. So if you do have any questions, just pose those questions online. We'll go through those. We'll take some time. At this point, I don't see one. I see one, but I don't see any in the Q&A box. But what we will do is, if there are questions that come forward, we'll go through those questions, and then I will allow an opportunity for closing comments, and then we will close the session with closing final comments from both co-leaders of the Green Party. Here's a question. Question is, if elected, will your government issue a public apology to those affected by discrimination in the child welfare system? I'll turn it over to Elizabeth May.
Yes.
Very short answer, concise. Jonathan Pednault.
Yes, and beyond that, we need reparations as well. There are so many injustices, and they've affected the lives of so many people. And apologies is one thing, but then there needs to be support, and we need to, unlike with the report and the number of pledges that have been taken by other parties, we need to act. Enough with the waiting. Yeah.
I just want to say a shout out to one of our colleagues in Parliament, Laurie Idlot, who's the only Inuk woman in Parliament. She injects something so important in every conversation about the intergenerational trauma, that there's intergenerational love, and we need to focus on support and love and caring. And yes, of course, reparations. But I find Lori, oh God, I hope Lori gets reelected. Obviously, I hope I get reelected in Toronto because it's an election, but there's many good people on all sides of the House and Indigenous voices like Leah Gazan from Winnipeg and Lori Idlut from Nunavut. We need more Indigenous voices as well. We have Indigenous candidates within the Green Party. Obviously, I mentioned Rainbow Eyes. We need more Indigenous voices in our Parliament.
Thank you both for the response. So there is a question that actually has been touched on. You've provided a response to this, but I think it's a very important issue, so we will go back to it. And it's to follow up on your comments dealing with justice in policing. So again, you've touched on this as well already, but I think it's very important. And the question is, if elected, how will your party support First Nations policing? Elizabeth May.
One thing we have to do is tear down the RCMP and decide what it's good for and how we rebuild it. So Indigenous, I mean, it's local policing in community. Indigenous communities are the focus today, but I'd have to say in a lot of settler culture communities too, the racism of the RCMP, their inability to de-escalate a situation all too quick to pull out a gun. Local policing needs better training. In Indigenous communities, we'll do everything as requested. I mean, we're in a nation-to-nation relationship. So even answering this question, I'm aware of, wait a minute, I'm not going to say what Indigenous policing needs for supports. That's for Indigenous governments to inform settler culture governments. This is how this is going to work. This is what we need to do it. And then that determines what we will support.
Thank you. Jonathan Pednault, I don't know if you have anything further, or I can go to the next question.
In general, I mean, in any small community, it can be very difficult to police, right? And I think for us as Greens, we would like to see less policing and more love and more support for to prevent crime early on. And that means, again, housing, water, food, opportunities, and reaffirmation of one's place in society that's recognized and treasured by the overall society, and that is one way to reduce the level of crime, reduce the need for policing. Policing is a last resort and should be the last resort on anything, and that's true whether it's in Indigenous communities or in downtown Montreal or other places. So ultimately, our goal is to create a society where people are able to live good lives of meaning in connection with the people around them and nature. And right now we have the opposite. So we see policing as a tool that does exist in the societies that we live in, and that's again a very sort of colonial mindset of having to come in with the stick and keep people within specific rules. But our societies and our economies are not providing people with the basic needs. And so we need to deal with that first and foremost. In terms of the policing, Elizabeth is very much right. I think we need to hear what nations need throughout the country, communities in the Arctic as well. What do they need and how can we best support it? But I'm pretty sure that before policing, the first questions will be about housing and food and security and that infrastructure, because those are the questions that politicians have been receiving for a long time, but sadly the federal government has not been nearly as responsive to those questions as it should have been.
Thank you. Next question comes from Louise Natawapio from the Naskapi Nation. And Louise asks, what steps would you take to include Indigenous history to all education systems across Canada so they can learn the real truth the real truth, especially from an Indigenous perspective, so that the rest of Canada understands why our way of lives are detrimental. Indigenous communities have the highest suicide rates, high school dropout rates, addictions, etc. And how can you help these communities affected by these? Elizabeth May.
We might have an end to this because generally speaking, and I want to thank Louise and the very, very excellent question of Haftanascape. We are in federal provincial terms under the Constitution. The usual answer is hands off. Education and curriculum K to 12 is provincial jurisdiction exclusively. But the relationship and First Nations relationship and Indigenous justice issues fall under the federal government because it's the honor of the crown. There's treaties that were signed that are not being lived up to, obviously. So this gives us a reason to say to the provincial governments, you have to indigenize, decolonialize your curriculum to meet Section 35 of the Constitution. You cannot fail in the education system to fail to encourage and educate and share with settler culture kids and new Canadian kids. This is a country that is built on stolen land, a place called Turtle Island. If we teach the lessons that come from Indigenous wisdom, we'll have a much healthier country. I've said for a long time, land back. Ever since the Chilcotin decision and recognition how Indigenous title is different from fee simple title and the settler culture legal tradition, if all of our land was under the Supreme Court of Canada's definition of Indigenous title, collective and intergenerational, we would be a much healthier, more secure society for all. So indigenizing and decolonializing our education system is a key to survival for all Canada, not only a step towards justice and reconciliation.
And if I may, another lever the federal government possesses right now is using broadcasting laws to make sure that there is enough Indigenous content on national television. I'm not talking just APTN or specifically CBC North, or but truly to have on mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream media more Indigenous content in Indigenous languages as well. I'm very concerned about the fact that the number of Indigenous languages are under threat right now. As a Quebecer and a Francophone, that speaks very strongly to me. But as a multilingualist, I'm also deeply ashamed of the fact that I do not speak an Indigenous language, but I do speak Norwegian or Spanish. And that is something that needs to be addressed. There is a wealth of culture and traditions that needs to be uplifted. And that sadly, as Elizabeth pointed out, is not being properly communicated in the curriculums at the provincial level. And that has to change. Discussions with the provinces are necessary, but at the federal level, there are a number of things that can be done tomorrow, and one of them is requiring broadcasters here in Canada to spend a specific amount of budget on Indigenous-led productions for the great public with subtitles if needed, right? But there's a lot for all of us settlers down south to learn about Indigenous cultures, and they are diverse and they are ancient, and there's a wealth of knowledge there that and I find it's just a shame how little we in the settler culture know, and I think the federal government has a role to play to help lift up those stories, those voices, that history, and that knowledge.
So the next question comes from a remote First Nation in northern Manitoba, and this is from Chief Michael Yellowback. He asks, remote Indigenous communities do not have any policing services, where it makes it challenging to respond to any serious incidents that occur. We only have First Nation safety officers, but they don't have the adequate training and equipment. How will your party support Indigenous communities to having their own Indigenous police force? I'll let you decide who goes first. Jonathan.
Yeah. And once again, you know, and I hear the preoccupation around crime and safety, and it goes beyond crime and safety. It goes as well, I presume, to questions tied to search and rescue, to a question tied to the climate emergency, the wildfires. I mean, communities, especially remote communities throughout the country right now, are faced with this challenge, and there is a need for more people with public safety experience and baggage and the tools needed to protect communities. And that's something that we've been advocating for in this election, the creation of a national civil defense corps in coordination, in discussion with Indigenous communities throughout the country as well, because there is a knowledge of the territory that is valuable when it comes to defending communities from various types of threats. Undoubtedly, there is a need to train more people and to make that training more accessible and available. Again, I don't believe, and we don't believe in the Green Party, that policing is necessarily always the answer to some of the challenges that communities are faced with. We need more mental health support, more, again, housing, like when the basics aren't there, policing may not be the answer to keep things calm. We need to build the necessary basics. But again, that depends on the needs that specific nations have, and you know, communities in Mi'kmaq won't have the same demands as communities here in Montreal and Ganizarage or Ganawage. And there's a lot of, I think, sadly, oftentimes solutions that come from Ottawa, they're very sort of one size fits all, and that's never been appropriate for Canada, and it certainly isn't appropriate for the diversity of Indigenous communities and Inuit communities and Indigenous off reserve as well that exists throughout the country.
Thank you. So Elizabeth May, if you're okay, if I can proceed to the next question. Okay, so the next question, a series of questions, so I'm going to try and put them together from Chief Ramona Horseman. And Chief Ramona Horseman is referring to a number of outstanding TLE claims. So TLE claims, of course, treaty land entitlement claims. And the question is, can you support those when they go to cabinet for approvals? She writes that there are a number of TLE claims right from 1904-ish. And she also writes that understanding the TLE special claims go to the cabinet for final approval. So again, question is, can you support those when they go to cabinet for approvals? Elizabeth May.
Absolutely. And it's a shocking thing that when you have these title land entitlements that have been resolved, and then they sit there, and it's shameful. And yes, of course, we support it. One of the things you might think is, well, okay, you get some Green MPs, you're not going to be in cabinet. We're really good at working the room and going and sitting down with whatever minister is playing a key role in the cabinet, saying you can't let this sit here. It's you know, we can mobilize, we can be part, and we can work. And I just want to flag this: we'll always work for you as chief and council anywhere across Canada. If you want to make sure that an urgent matter is delivered directly to whatever minister is holding things up, we may not have power, but I'm an excellent messenger. I sit down with a minister. I said, you've got to read this, because you've got to have a way to get through. There's so many gatekeepers and handlers and people in the way. So here's a cabinet decision. What's the excuse for these delays? There's no excuse. It's not as if this hasn't already been sitting through so many years of injustice, and it's decided by the courts, and it's still not implemented. So yes, and thank you, Ramona Horseman.
Thank you very much. Another question from Chief Ramona Horseman, sort of two parts to this, but what she's referring to, she says, is the residential school graveyards. So she says the residential school graveyards. Question is, what are your thoughts on, quote, dig now, ask later?
my first thought is every party in this country and prime ministers and so on have always said, "Oh yes, we support all the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reports," and from our late hero Murray Sinclair and late Judge Murray Sinclair, and one of those recommendations was very clear: I provide every family with the explanation of every single child who went into the schools and never came home. Provide that information. So we have two ways of approaching this. One is to physically dig for remains. And I mentioned earlier that I was so honored to know that Cook P. Roseanne Casimir is on the line, what they went through with using remote sensing and finding what, could be grave sites, could be. Then it creates this horrific, which we think should be absolutely unacceptable. It is unacceptable, but legislated is unacceptable, sort of denialism around residential schools. But certainly the recommendation from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the government institutions that ran those schools have an obligation to dig out the truth from their own files. Where did those children that entered the school that never went home, what happened to them? What their names? Find their remains, return them to their families. That's not. It's so the question of the way it was phrased, and I don't disagree that that's sometimes how it's pressed forward. The settler culture governments, the colonial governments have not a leg to stand on this. They stole the children from their families. According to the TRC report, there were, and I'm just going from memory, so I've got the number wrong, forgive me, 6,000 children that we know of for sure were taken from their parents and never got home. What happened? Where were they buried? What happened? We have as a government, a settler culture government, an absolute obligation. And every political leader has said, "Oh yes, we accept the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so we'll get on that." When? Like a week from never? So I hear you, and I agree but I think digging may be more controversial than living. And I'm not saying I'm ducking that, but please, to God, how do we ignore the recommendation from the TRC Commission and the calls for justice that every political leader of every stripe has said, "Oh yes, we'll do that." Like when? The files are there somewhere. We can dig them up. We can find the files and trace what happened to every child. And if it requires physical digging, so be it. We have to, just as God bless Premier Wab Kinew for doing it. When people said it was too controversial to go look in a landfill, really? When women's bodies are being desecrated in that way, you think it's too controversial to go dig? So both things, dig in the files, dig where we have anomalies in the ground.
So we have a few more questions, but before we go to the next question, Jonathan Pednault, response to that.
Just very briefly, I very much agree with what Elizabeth said. I mean, I was just in Syria over the New Year, a country that also faced a significant amount of people disappeared and mass graves uncovered following the liberation from the Assad regime, and there was a very quick demand from people, family, relatives to come and collect the bodies as soon as possible. And it is so crucial that can be done in a respectful way that doesn't contribute to further trauma, and that also provides the answers of what happened to those children. Each and every one of these mass graves here in Canada is also a crime scene to some extent, and that we need to find the answers. But the question is, where are the resources? Where are the forensic teams? It's been 2-3 years now. There's so little progress, and the progress is too slow. Elizabeth is right. We need to dig in the file, but we also need to put in the right expertise. That expertise exists. Why is it not being deployed right now?
So the next question, we're going to shift back to justice. So this is, again, dealing with justice. And the question is, there are so many calls to action for justice that have gone unimplemented. If elected, How will you prioritize implementation of these calls to action?
I mentioned one. Show us, hand over complete records for every child that was taken from families. The other calls, there's so many calls to justice, and in general, I think because they speak to very different issues and prioritizing. I mean, you're supposed to. We are as a federal government, all of those calls to justice, and we're supposed to have been delivered already. So then you say, how do we prioritize within a list where the negligence and the neglect is so striking? I think I don't like the idea. I know it sounds terrible. I really don't want to prioritize all now. There's no excuse for the delays. I know that it's expensive and I know it can be time consuming, but the only way I could possibly imagine prioritizing would be to ask all Indigenous governments in Canada for advice. First Nations, Métis, Inuit, what's your advice, how we would prioritize? But I have to say my first reaction is to set priorities on issues that are so long neglected and say which is more important to act on now. At another level, I live with this a lot because I refer to where we are now, on our planet, as a polycrisis world. We got wars that are breaking out. We got a crazy person in the White House. We've got injustice. We've got the climate crisis. It's pressing on us. They're all urgent. They all require attention. I'm not going to prioritize. I'm going to say we have to do it all now. So the solutions one picks in one area, like responding to the climate crisis, should also create opportunities for ending homelessness, ensuring that people have a decent social safety net, mental health supports, all those things work together for good. It's just not possible to say, well, for now we've decided we can't deal with the climate crisis because we have to deal with Trump and his tariff war. No, we have to deal with everything and all at once, which requires a different way of thinking. And again, if we could get back to the fundamental notion put forward through Indigenous wisdom that if humanity doesn't understand that we have to love Mother Earth and protect Mother Earth, then there's really not much point in talking about anything else because we're not going to have any economy to fight over. So I know I'm ranting a bit. Jonathan, you should take over.
No, but again, I mean, I think it's also there's no one size fits all, right? Certain communities across the country will have priorities with one specific part of the recommendations, others with others, So I think as Elizabeth said, it's about consultation first and foremost. It's about recognizing that while Ottawa still has to a large extent the control over the financial resources, it is up to Ottawa to listen to the demands from the communities and respond to them and deal in a context of nation to nation. It's not up to Ottawa to decide, okay, which one of these is the priority now. It's about sitting down with the various communities and hearing what their need, their most urgent need is now, and respond to it. I think that's yeah.
So the final question that we have deals with languages. And of course, you'll note that when I started speaking in this forum, in the session earlier this afternoon, I spoke in my language, my Shinimon language. When Elder Weasel Traveler spoke, he spoke in his language. When National Chief Woodhouse Nibenak started, she spoke in her language. And our languages are very important. So the question is your party prepared to recognize First Nation languages as official languages and fund learning initiatives properly?
I mean, Elizabeth.
I would say yes, but the costs it will be phased. There's no question. The European Union is 27 separate sovereign nation states with 23 official languages. Even within British Columbia, I know there are hundreds of different Indigenous languages. We look at New Zealand quite often as a model because New Zealand's parliament has a set aside for always a certain number of Maori seats. But again, the New Zealand settler culture, and our New Zealand Green colleagues are mostly also speak Maori, and it also has a co-leader system, and one of the co-leaders is always Maori. New Zealand's is quite different from Canada. There's one Indigenous language in New Zealand that I know of, it's Maori. And the ability to say, and the Maori Parliament, by the way, because it has proportional representation, the representatives in Parliament who are Maori exactly mirrors the proportion of the population that's Maori, because there's the set aside Maori seats, and then there's parties like the Green Party that have Maori MPs who are elected through a different mechanism. Back to official languages in Canada, the answer has to be yes. If we don't protect and preserve Indigenous languages, a number of them, we're down to a handful of native speakers who could actually speak the language from birth. There's been a tremendous effort, and I think of the Haida Nation, our candidate in Skeena Bulkley Valley, Deanna Young, was one of the stars of the film, the first full-length Haida language film, Edge of the Knife. These are languages being grabbed from the brink of extinction, brought back, and thank goodness, in my community, I mentioned with Saanich territory, there is immersion in Senchothan. Settler culture kids can also get immersion in Senchothan, learn traditional Senchothan prayers and songs. That'd be fantastic for most Canadian kids. Right now, we have 2 official languages, and most Canadians can speak one of them. But imagine if we really embraced and properly funded not just protection and preservation of Indigenous languages within Indigenous communities, but changing, when you change a language and your brain learns a new language, your brain relearns other things too. And the mindset and the words used and the concepts change your worldview. And when I learned from my friend Adam Olson, who's Sartlip First Nation, that the words in Senchothan, when you talk about trees, it's the tree people is the language. And then the salmon are the salmon people. And then there's the stories that go back to when the boy became the deer and the deer people. It changes your worldview when you're coming from a different place altogether in settler culture traditions to learn an Indigenous language and really learn it. So I say yes, but I'm also conscious of the fact that in our current platform that we're unveiling soon, we've actually figured out how we afford the things we say we're going to do. So I would say getting all Indigenous languages to be properly protected and recognized as official languages with the requirement that statutes be translated into each of those languages is a long-term goal, whereas I would say turning over the information about where every Indigenous child ended up who was stolen for residential schools is urgent now, and over time, recognition and protection for every Indigenous language across Canada.
Jonathan Pednault.
There's a need for us, again, back to the constitutional discussion, there's a need for us as a country to sit down together and re-examine some of the so-called principles on which this country was founded in 1867. There are, I think we need to recognize even more properly and enshrine the existence of and the recognition and the rights of Indigenous nations throughout this country on equal footing with Quebec and les Acadiens and les Métis and Inuit people. We've got diversity. We need to live up to the so-called confederation that we were supposed to be and never quite were. And that requires constitutional discussions. But in the meantime, the federal government needs to invest in protecting and preserving Indigenous languages, in promoting them as well, in making it more available and accessible for settlers to be immersed and gain proper appreciation of the linguistic richness of Indigenous languages. And right now, that's not being done. So that's definitely a topic that's very close to our hearts and something we want to see more of. Yeah.
I meant to mention, of course, that Ron Ignatius has done such amazing work, and he's officially got the title of Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. But no funding to meet that task. So this is going to be expensive and it's worth every penny, but it's something we support the protection of all Indigenous languages across Canada and to be recognized as official languages. I'm just being cautious to say, yeah, and we know it will take time and it needs funding right away. And we need the guidance of people like the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages and making sure we pass the laws in Parliament. And I'll never forget passing and thinking, right, but where's the funding to go with this? Because we can't just give lip service to the idea that we need to protect Indigenous languages without fully funding the effort. And that's that we commit to right away. The recognition of the words official languages brings with it translating everything, every statute, every public document in Canada into all those languages. We need to start with protecting languages and making sure accessibility for every Indigenous community in their own language. That is less than making them official languages. So I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you both so much. We are looking at the time, and I have an obligation to be mindful and stick to some of our time frames. I see a question has just come up, but we will wrap up. So at this point, I would like to thank you both, the co-leaders of the Green Party of Canada, Elizabeth May, of course, and Jonathan Pednault. And what I'd like to do is if you can share potentially 3 minutes closing comments, and then if I can ask you to stay online, I'm going to ask National Chief Cindy Woodhouse to provide some comments, and then it's important to close in a good way. So final comments. Again, I'll look to you both to split the time, Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pednault. We'll do the rock, paper, scissors here. You're pointing at each other.
Yeah, put my timer on and I'll start the time. I use this little timer in Parliament, you wouldn't believe it. Question that you ask in question period has to be 30 seconds. So I use this little thing because otherwise I don't know how long I'm talking. I don't have an electronic talking stick in Parliament. I wish we had one. It would cut down on a lot of the nonsense. Just say again. Hashkasiam, Miigwech. This is such an important initiative. I am deeply grateful that you have included us. If I can say what I'd most like to be remembered for one of these days when I go to meet the Creator for a longer period of time, I don't plan to go anytime soon. I got a lot of work to do. But I'd like to think that I contributed to real reconciliation, which my friend Miles Richardson, who used to be national chief, well, the president of the Council of the Haida Nation, he said, reconciliation is when I see you as you see yourself, and you see me as I see myself. Reconciliation should not be hard. It's to be a decent human being. And to you and everyone on this call and all our relations, I am deeply grateful for this time and this opportunity to share. Jonathan.
I'm equally grateful for the opportunity to meet with all of you. I'm new to politics or newer to politics, and I look forward to receiving your guidance and your thoughts. Federal party leaders and prime ministers are, which, to be quite clear, I do not think we'll be forming government. I don't think anyone here is under that delusion, but we are determined in the next parliament to make sure that we are strong advocates for reconciliation, for social justice, for real environmental action. And we will need your guidance in doing this work. And I look forward to more opportunities to engage with all of you and more people in the communities that you represent. Miigwech.
Thank you both, Miigwech. Thank you both so much, Jonathan Pednault and Elizabeth May with the Green Party of Canada. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinak for closing comments.
Well, thank you so very much. I also note that there's a couple of chiefs that were in the chat, and to our staff, if we could make sure that those questions get to the leader, to the leaders today. And I want to thank you to both Elizabeth and Jonathan for putting your names forward very publicly in this country. I know that it's not always easy to be a candidate, and you've got a big push across the country, and we wish you all well. And I'm glad that we're having these discussions and that you have participated with First Nations this afternoon. With the election underway, of course, we will encourage, and our chiefs are on the line, and they'll be encouraging their First Nations across the country to engage with all the local candidates and, of course, all the federal leaders to make our voices heard, in a big way. In addition to renewing their commitment to reconciliation, this election, of course, is also an opportunity for federal party leaders to renew and demonstrate their readiness to realize the full potential of the First Nations economy in this country. The question is not just if they support First Nations rights. Of course, the question is what actions will they take to uphold these rights? So I want to thank you both for joining us today. I think to everybody else on the line, the full prosperity for all, the First Nations priorities for the 2025 federal election document is available on the AFN website. And we do invite you all back next week. We've got 3 more sessions coming up, of course, with the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, of course, the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, and of course, the Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney. And so I know that lots of discussions to be had, and I want to thank the Green Party for being here today, and I'm just going to ask you all once again to make sure that all your candidates receive our priorities document, our 2025 federal election document. We'll be making sure all other leaders also do the same with their candidates. And let's make the best country that we can around the world, and that's going to start by working with First Nations. So thank you so very much for being here. Chimigwech, we'll see you again. Thank you so very much. Now.
Chimigwech, hi, Gaila Kasla, Ashkasiam, Masicho.
Thanks, Chimigwech. National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nipanak for the closing comments and also the leadership in making sure that we have a forum such as this for First Nation leadership across the country to have an opportunity to ask questions of the party leaders leading up to the election. So thank you very much for that. As well, as National Chief indicated, the next session will be April 22nd, and that'll be at 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be with the Conservative Party leader. So with that, we will now close, and I'm going to ask and turn it back to Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler to close this session in a prayer, and then we will officially close and see you at the next session. So with that, Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler, go ahead.
Okay, well, it certainly was an experience for me to listen in on this conversation. Again, my prayer to the Creator, asking the Creator for blessings and asking the Creator to give us, the best possible leader that's going to be there for First Nation people to move us forward. There's poverty. Poverty is a violence, and we need so much assistance in all areas to move us forward. I'm not speaking on behalf of my First Nation, but I'm just sharing what I see there. So my prayer again will be for the chiefs, our national chiefs, to continue to move our agenda forward, to make a difference, most positive way for our people, and also for the country, the leadership in the country, to make a difference for all of us and everybody. Ayos batapio, na tu sas pumos and hamokriogax chimax, etchistax machri, makawatach to sa. And Hanum Kitauxina, as Pomo Kina, Kimokina, Kichipotus, and they can Kimapi Pichu, and they can Daguti Chikakina, okay. Sort of Kane, Poina Kaname and Stokindi now, Gagako Chaka to Mokina, Ganasuka, you can attach the two. namin na pita kira kamo sakat mo kinasukapi. O kinoksikso ko ispinaraw si dais siwak kina dawas dais siwak kana kamo chipyo kinan sipatipyo kinasukapi no kanisiputu kinan. Actually, I ask the Creator for divine intervention for the best outcomes, as I said earlier, for all of us, blessings for our national chiefs, our regional chiefs, all our leadership, blessings for them, for their work in being champions to bring us our needs, all our needs. Ask the Creator for that assistance, for the help to move things forward. I ask for blessings for Elizabeth May and the other individual that came online. I'm not good at remembering names, but my prayers are with you and everybody that's online. Everybody, we all need the same things. We need good health, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. From a holistic perspective, I ask the Creator to give us good health and blessings for all our needs and to move forward. Amen.
Thank you so much, Miigwech, Knowledge Keeper, Leonard Weasel Traveler. My name is Adam Fiddler. We will see you next time. Wajia.
Thank you.